So you're new to Warpforge, and you're wondering, how is it that in 40,000 years from now, skeletons have upgraded from bone to metal? Well, if you're curious about the Necrons and how the Sautekh Empire play in the game of Warpforge, look no further. In this video, we're going to talk about the lore behind the Sautekh race. We're going to cover the basic Warlords of the faction. We're going to look at some of the keywords, the play style, the strengths and the weaknesses, and then we're going to talk about tips for collecting and show you a couple of example beginner and pro level decks. So let's get into it, shall we? The Necrons are an ancient race of metallic beings who once ruled the galaxy. They were once beings, but their bodies were replaced with synthetic ones to achieve immortality. However, their minds were corrupted by the Cryptek, a caste of scientists who sought to preserve the Necrons at any cost. The Necrons now wander the galaxy in search of their lost technology and seek to reclaim their former glory. They are a formidable force equipped with advanced weaponry and armor, and their relentless pursuit of their goals makes them a dangerous threat to all life in the galaxy. The Sautekh are a dynasty of Necrons known for their unwavering devotion to their god, Night Haunter. They believe in the purity of the original Necron race and view their brethren who have embraced other paths as corrupt. Their homeworld, Sautekh, is a desolate, barren land where they constantly engage in ritualistic combat to hone their skills. The Sautekh are formidable warriors, equipped with advanced weaponry and armor, and their unwavering belief in their cause makes them a dangerous force on the battlefield. Okay, so like many other factions, there are 4 warlords to choose from in the Sautekh Dynasty. So the first warlord that you're going to get as a beginner is Necron Sautekh. Now, Necron is pretty good because he is the warlord that is able to put out another body, i.e. another troop, every single turn. So he can deploy a Necron warrior, which itself comes with Vanguard and Remnant, and that means that you're constantly putting out a blocker to being hit back or to other more important troops. And Necron Sautekh has got a lot better recently as more tools have been added to the faction. It's very much the relentless kind of tempo warlord. Next up we have Oricon the Diviner, which is the epic warlord. Oricon has become unanimous with the Scarabs package, which we'll talk more about, but basically because of the warlord stratagem only costing 1 energy, it has good synergy with the artifice abilities as it's able to always guarantee a cheap spell. Then we have Sautekh the Stormlord. The legendary Necron Lord is definitely a very good legendary lord, one that you will probably likely want to craft, and especially if you enjoy a more control based build. Sautekh has long been one of the better control decks, and with having the big 40 health and his talent Lord of the Storm, which enables you to deal 1 damage, giving you really good ability to control the board, but equally it heals 1 to the warlord every turn, which again plays into that control strategy of healing and surviving deep into the late game. Last but not least, we have Sautekh the Cruel, who is the most recent warlord to join the fray, came out with the reinforcements, and Sautekh we're still finding our feet with, but he is the Destroyer warlord. He is particularly quite a beefy, for 35 health warlord, quite a beefy warlord, as the talent Hardwired Destruction gives him 1 armor and +1 melee and +1 range until the start of your next turn. So when it comes to faction-specific keywords, there are a few in the Necrons. The first one is Destroyer, which the idea with the Destroyer is that the units are slightly overstated, that they're quite powerful units, but they do have this drawback, which is that if this unit can kill an enemy, then it cannot attack a different target. So it does restrict what you can attack. That's the sort of slight drawback, and it means you have to play around it. On the plus side, there are certain units and stratagems that benefit those with the Destroyer keyword. So next up we have got the biggest, probably most significant keyword in the faction, and that is Remnant. So basically what happens with Remnant is whenever the card dies, it leaves behind a Remnant, which just looks like a pile of rubble bones on the floor, basically. Now, those Remnants, you can use spells and abilities to reanimate them, essentially. So in true skeleton form, you can keep bringing your cards back. Now, Remnants do stick on the board for one turn, but your opponent can attack the Remnant, and if they do dedicate an attack towards a Remnant, they will also clear it as well. And last but not least, it's not really a faction-specific keyword, but I do think that Necrons probably, of all the factions, make the most use of Artifice. So Artifice basically does something when you play a stratagem. So this one says Artifice, deploy a flayed one. So if you played any spell or stratagem in the game with this on the board, it would deploy a flayed one. If we played three stratagems, it would deploy 3 flayed ones. So when it comes to the playstyle of the Necrons, there are kind of 3 main things that we see. The first one is what I'm calling the Scarab package. This is really based around making use of spells, or in this game they're called stratagems, and usually we see this mainly with Orokin, although you can use the other Warlords. But what this revolves around is playing Scarabs either through the Scarab itself, or the Spider's Nest, or the Sautekh Spider, and then basically playing a deck full of stratagems. Every time you do that, it will mean that every Scarab on the board duplicates itself. So if you imagine you've got 4 Scarabs, you play a stratagem, you suddenly have a full board. And yeah, this has created an entire archetype, and it has indeed been one of the more powerful archetypes. Although, be warned, if you do play this, you will get your opponent likely to rage quit on ladder, as it is one of the least popular decks to play against, for sure. And the Scarabs, essentially, once they fill out the board, they use the Scarabs to control the board, and then they use things like self-destruction, which destroys the Scarabs, and for each one, it deals 3 damage to a random enemy. Next up, we've got the Control package, and Necrons again have been... this has definitely been one of the key player styles for Necrons ever since the beginning of Early Access, and we usually see Sautekh as the Warlord for this type of play. And basically what it revolves around is playing lots of Vanguard units like the Lich Guard and the Praetorian, and lots of flankers like the Sautekh Destroyer or the Tomb Guard, and then making use of the Technomancer, who can essentially reanimate more those Vanguard, putting up walls of defense, or bringing back flankers to deal with our opponent's board. And as we get into the late game, you've got these bigger units like the Hexmark Destroyer, which can combine with your Artifice to basically clear the board and just do waves of AoE destruction. This is all topped off then finally with the main win con in the faction, which is the Tomb World, which brings back 5 friendly troops that died this game. This is such an overwhelming board state for your opponent to deal with in one turn that it usually ends the game. Last but not least, we've got the Tempo package. And this is I would say this is a playstyle that has got more popular and more powerful of late since the reinforcement drop. We've seen things like the Flayed Ones pack come into play, and along with the Flayed Ones, units like the Ghost Ark really make good use of the Artifice ability, being able to put out lots and lots of units all at once and just overwhelm your opponent. And even if they are able to clear the board, you've got the very powerful Resurrection Orb that can just bring back a board full of remnants. This tends to be most popular with Nemesis Andrak, because Nemesis' ability, he is able to ensure that adjacent remnants don't actually disappear at the end of your turn like they do with other Warlords. So if you like playing out troops on curve and kind of ending the game quickly, this is a good option for you. Okay, so let's talk about your Necron collection. If you click on Rewards and then the Missions tab, the Campaign tab, you can select the Necron icon at the top here, and that will bring up the campaign. Now, all you have to do is complete one mission with the Necron tab selected, and that will give you campaign points, which are over here, and this will enable you to get a free 30 card deck. By the way, you can do this for every faction completely free. That's a free 30 card deck you can get for every single faction. Now, I do highly recommend buying the premium campaign, And the reason for that is that as you unlock these nodes on the campaign, you'll see on the right here there is a secondary reward which is only available to the premium campaign members, and there's some fantastic things like legendary wildcards in those slots. As you go along the campaign, as you complete your daily missions and you play games, you will gain more and more campaign points to unlock, and as you can see, you will unlock things like cards, you'll unlock things like booster packs, and resources to craft, and you'll also unlock things like avatars and card backs as well. I found with the premium campaign that if you complete all of your dailies, it takes about a week to get to the end of the campaign, which is really important because you have 2 legendary cards awaiting you. One thing that's pretty cool as a passive benefit to having the premium campaign is on your daily login bonus. Just for logging in, you'll get an extra 200 campaign points for each faction that you have purchased the premium campaign for, just for logging in. Now, let's talk about some of the key cards that when you're new to the Necrons you're going to want to collect. Let's begin with the legendary cards. I really do think Sautekh the Stormlord is a fantastic warlord. Not all the legendary warlords are a necessary priority, but I do think Sautekh is, particularly if you are interested in a control style of play. Next up, I would say that Oberon, particularly if you're going down that route, is also very, very good, because Oberon is a key tool to helping you survive in that late game. I think the Locust Lord is a really good legendary to get, and mainly I'd say the Locust Lord out of all of these is a card that you'll play in probably every single Necron archetype. In many ways, you could even argue he should be the first one you get because of that. And again, my very first legendary that I crafted in the game was Tomb World, and so I have to say that again, if you want that control style play, Tomb World is just excellent. It feels so satisfying to play this and get all these big bodies back into play. Now, what about outside of the legendary cards? I think what is sometimes referred to as the threes package in Necrons, which is the Tombblade, the Triarch Praetorian, and the Technomancer. These 3 cards have excellent synergy. They're early game, and so therefore they fit well into whether it's control or a tempo build. The Praetorian and the Tombblade both have Remnant. The Praetorian blocks your opponent, the Tombblade removes your opponent, and the Technomancer brings both of them back. So you can essentially create this great loop between these 3 cards, and it gives you lots of flexibility and a good way to stand up to the board state at that stage of the game. If you do go ahead and craft those cards, you're guaranteed to be able to use them in pretty much every single deck. Now, I would also recommend the Scythe Assault because it is the only true AoE, which stands for Area of Effect, stratagem in the faction. So this gives you the ability to just remove a wide board if you get fall behind. And actually more recently, this isn't always the case, but the Implacable Conqueror is becoming more and more of a key card in Necrons now. This has received a buff recently, and it does make your deck incredibly scary when your opponent knows that all the troops that you draw are costing 2 less than their actual cost. Okay, great BJ, but let's see how that all comes together in the form of some decks, shall we? Alright, let's start with the beginner deck. Now, with the beginner deck, the rules of the game are I haven't put any cards in here that are epics or legendary. So these are all common and rare cards only. And this is a Nemesis deck. Basically, what you're looking to do is to play these, is to make use of Nemesis' ability that allows you to play a Necron Warrior on the first turn. And then try to play out a fairly smooth curve for your Praetorians, your Deathmark, or your Psychomancers, using your reactive cards like the Tombblade and the Sautekh Destroyer as removal, similarly for the Doom Scythe. And then into the late game, you have got some pretty big bombs in the Hexmark, the Immortal's Phalanx, which is an absolute beast. If your opponent doesn't get rid of the Remnant and you resurrect this thing, it duplicates, so you'll end up with 2 of them coming back. And we also have the very powerful Ghost Ark. Just so you know, guys, when you play the Ghost Ark and then you play Nemesis' ability, just those 2 combinations, that puts out this big, huge flying Ghost Ark plus 2 Necron Warriors that have Vanguard, which means your opponent has to kill those first. So very, very powerful, and every time you cast a stratagem, it'll keep putting out Necron Warriors with the Ghost Ark. And then we have the hard removal in the Methodical Destruction. in case your opponent plays any really large units that block our game plan. So this is a pretty nice beginner deck, and definitely one I would recommend. Alright, so now let's imagine you've been collecting for a while, you've been building up your epics and your legendaries. What does that look like? Well, as we talked about in the playstyles, there are different roads you can go down. You could do the scarabs, you could do the control. What I'm actually going to share with you is my most recent Necron deck, which is what I called the React and Destroy. And it was actually making use of Sautekh the Cruel. You could easily replace this with Stormlord, Sautekh Stormlord for sure. Very similar build would work just fine with him as well. But actually I found that I had surprising success with this deck, and it does play along the lines of the control deck, but it's more of what I'd call like a bodied sort of mid-ranged control deck. So you're playing big beefy bodies, and we use Tomb World as the finisher. So there you go, guys. There's some examples of a beginner and a more advanced pro deck once you've got your collection up to speed. So there you go, guys. We've covered the lore, the warlords, the playstyle, the collecting tips, and some deck building to get you started. Like I said, I do recommend the premium campaign. It will only take you about a week to get around 4 legendaries and be able to start to make a very powerful deck. But of course, it's entirely up to you. If you'd like this and found it useful, please let me know. I always like interacting in the comments. And of course, I appreciate all the support in terms of liking the video and hitting that subscribe. Be sure to turn on the notifications so you get noticed whenever I bring out new content. If you did find this helpful, I also have a couple of other series worth checking out, such as my Warpforge Fundamentals series, and maybe one of these 2 videos might be useful to you as well. Take it easy.